Let me talk to you about how Visa debit card works in the US versus Canada. This can be interesting for you if you have, let's say, customers on both sides of the border, or you are interested in multinational commerce. Okay, so here are the general facts. Real fast, what's a debit card? A debit card is a type of a bank card issued by a customer's bank, which can be used to make purchases using funds pulled from their savings or checking account. Pretty clear, right? Unlike credit cards, the transaction can only be approved if the customer has the available funds in their account. And customers can also withdraw cash using a debit card, either from the bank using an ATM or by requesting cashback options where available during the transaction. So that's really the gist of it. Now, debit cards are much easier to be approved for than a credit card because they don't carry the same risk of cardholders not paying off their balance because it's their money. However, debit cards don't often come with the same perks as credit cards. And so debit cards can only be used for in-person transactions and are not always accepted for things like tap at the gas station or paying for parking. Now, there are workarounds for signing up for services which require a contract or recurring payment like gym memberships. So a customer can actually sign up for an ACH bank transfer that authorizes the business to pull funds from their bank account every month, every 3 months, every 6 months, for example. And you can even set up monthly bills to come out of your account that way. That's totally possible. And so Visa Debit, on the other hand, offers a little bit more flexibility. And let me explain. So is Visa Debit a credit card? Well, these cards act like a debit card, but they will, or at least many, they don't have the same added benefits of credit cards. So whether you are tapping to pay for your morning coffee, traveling to Paris or Amsterdam, or ordering skip the dishes for the fourth time this week, no judgment here. These cards are famous for giving customers some of the purchasing power and convenience of credit cards. However, they are different than credit cards because they come with without the responsibility, purchasing interest, or required credit score of obtaining and using credit cards. So the main difference here between processing Visa and Visa debit and credit card transactions is that the funds are pulled from the cardholder's bank account instead of borrowing money from the issuing bank, okay, up to their approved credit limits. Now let me talk to you about prepaid versus Visa versus regular debit. Let's have a conversation about that. I'm still talking to you about how Visa debit works in the US versus Canada. So as I explained to you a little earlier, a regular debit card cannot be used online and doesn't offer the same some of the rewards programs and security of credit cards. These are cards that pull funds directly from a customer's bank account, typically a checking or savings account. Now, a preloaded debit card, on the other hand, is a card loaded with a balance that is not associated with a bank account. There is no bank account behind a preloaded card. Preloaded or prepaid, by the way. Now, prepaid cards are similar to debit cards in the fact that they are pulling funds, but they can also be used like gift cards to use online, in person, or to even pay bills. Okay, that's really important. So these are sometimes used for anonymous prepaid card transactions since they're not linked with a customer account, unless you have all the card details and purchasing receipts. However, it's kind of hard to recover the funds in the event that a prepaid card is lost or stolen. So like credit cards, prepaid debit cards have a CVV code on the back, which helps to prevent fraud and ensure that there is no unauthorized transaction. However, all that is required to make a transaction is to have actually the physical card. So now, Visa debit cards do actually the same thing as a prepaid. They do the same thing as prepaid or credit or debit cards, but they can also be used like credit cards. They pull funds from a customer's bank account like a debit card, but so that they are actually linked to their financial institution, their credit union, or their bank. So in all three cases, when you speak about when you think about what's really comparing and contrasting them, you cannot access borrowed money or have access to a credit limit. They do not contribute to your credit score or, let's say, acquire interest on unpaid purchases. Okay, in this way, they are different from credit cards. However, they can be great tools to help limit spending and help you foster budgeting. Or if you need to make online purchases but do not have access to a credit card, you can go with a prepaid card, a Visa debit card, or any other card. Okay, they also offer more security and protection from unauthorized online transactions if they are lost or stolen, as they can be really canceled or even locked, unlike prepaid credit card. Let me talk about the purchase process here. How a purchase is made with a Visa debit card. Let's talk about that. So basically, sort of, the thing is that when you think about Visa debit card, think about cards that make purchases using money from your account instead of borrowing money to be paid later. Okay, the money is already in the account and pulled directly from your account, rather than borrowing money to give to the card brand issuer down the road, like Discover, Chase, or whatever. Now, they work similarly to credit cards in that you can use them at millions of locations around the world, not just in the US or Canada, but around the world. You can also use them over the phone. You can use them online. That's really important. You can use them in person. You can use them in person, tap, swipe, or sign, or even pin. Okay, that's totally possible also. You can also use them at ATM withdrawals to take cash out, to actually take cash out, depending on the specifics of the card itself, because some cards have a different sort of requirements than others. So you have to make sure that you are actually abiding by the directives that the card issuer has actually instituted. You can also use them for recurring or bill payments. Okay, that's totally, and you can also use them for traveling, which can be really convenient. If you're somewhere in Bali or you're somewhere in Acapulco, Mexico, yeah, and you really need to actually make a payment, and you don't have, let's say, a local currency, having access to a prepaid card or a debit card or a Visa card can be really helpful to sort of, streamline the transaction. So while there are many uses for Visa debit cards, the way in which they work is actually different depending on whether you are in the US or in Canada. So let me talk about that, next, and explain to you the differences here. Especially, there are some subtle country regulations, some subtle country directives. There are some subtle also some processes that are based on the U.S. banking system versus the Canadian banking system. So you have to be aware of that. Let me talk about how Visa debit works. Let me first talk about how Visa debit works in the US. Okay. So in the US, Visa debit allows customers like you and me to use the same card to make both their credit and debit purchases. The card can run on both networks, whether the purchase is for debit or credit. So because the card operates on both processes, a merchant can choose whether to process it as a debit or a credit purchase, which makes the cards usable anywhere. Now, the customer's responsibility is to actually clarify if they would like to make a purchase using a credit or a debit. A credit purchase uses the cardholder's available credit card limit, while debit will deduct the purchase amount from the available balance in their checking or savings account. And that's pretty clear. Now, the merchant will then run the card through their payment processing system based on how the customer wants the transaction to be processed, because there are some subtleties here. Now, this is important. Now, as part of the Durbin Agreement, you as the merchant can process the card through the Interact rails first, which could save them cost in processing fees. Your customer will have to remember their PIN to do this, or alternatively, you can process the transaction through the default credit rails. Okay. The customer benefits from purchase protection on all their transactions, and they still earn points for their debit purchases. So that's pretty cool. So let me give you the types of Visa debit cards in the US. Now, Visa offers 25 different Visa debit cards in tandem with bank names such as TD Bank, Navy Fed, Regions. You have Greater Nevada Credit Union and more. Chase, by the way. And Visa debit cards in the US typically qualify for more rewards and perks than their northern neighbor. So if you have Visa cards in Canada, it's not the same thing. So at a minimum, most options waive the monthly fees, ranging from no balance requirements and surcharge-free ATM withdrawals to zero liability and purchase protection perks. Some cards, such as the Greater Nevada Credit Union checking card, even have compatibility with Apple Pay or other contactless payment methods. Let me talk about how Visa Debit works in Canada. Let's have a conversation about that. Now, in Canada, debit and credit cards must be issued as separate payment cards according to the Code of Conduct for the credit and debit card industry in Canada. This means what? It means that Visa Debit operates on a distinct network from the Interac network used by almost all debit cards in Canada. So whenever a consumer makes a purchase using a swipe or chip and PIN technology on their debit card, the transaction will be processed as an Interac debit transaction. So when a customer actually makes an online or a phone purchase using the numbers on the front of their card, the card will function as a Visa debit card. Now, this hybrid Canadian debit cards automatically deduct the money from the cardholder's bank account for all transactions, regardless of whether the transaction was processed using Visa's or Interac's network. And the thing is that if funds are not available, then the transaction will be declined. That's why, you have on social media, especially YouTube, you've seen some Canadian Visa cards being declined and the customer is pissed. That's why. Now, the card does not borrow money the way a credit card does. Let me talk about the 5 types of Visa debit cards in Canada. So there are 5 types of the Visa debit cards, and they each have unique restrictions, fees, and rewards program. So you have Visa Classic Debit, you have Visa Gold Debit, Visa Platinum Debit, Visa Signature Debit, and then you have Visa Infinite Debit. So that's important. Now, depending on your card, you may access unique perks and protections such as warranty, price and purchase protection, international medical services, digital concierge, auto rental insurance, and or even a dedicated COVID helpline back in the days. Like, a lot of people used it. It's one of those things where it's part of the perks. So let me talk to you now about processing rates. What you need to know about accepting Visa Debit, whether you are in the U.S. or you are in Canada, you got to have a clear idea of what the repercussions are on your bottom line. So if you are a merchant or a business owner in Canada, then Visa Debit purchases are processed as a credit card when the customer processes the transaction over the phone or online, and the interchange rates for that card brand will apply. So be very clear about what the transaction will actually, which conduit the transaction will go through. If you're using it in person, then it will be processed as a debit card, and the transaction will run through the Interac lines. However, suppose you are a U.S. merchant. In that case, you might have heard of the Durbin Agreement that really advocated for caps on interchange rates and the ability to process Visa Debit through the Interac rails before processing the card as a credit card on the credit card rails, which really has a higher fee. Now, why don't Visa debit cards always default to a cheaper Interac processing rates then? It really depends. It depends on the industry itself, but it depends also on the fees that everybody's trying to really grab here and there. It's a funny story. When the Durbin Agreement was first introduced, many U.S. customers realized after processing their Visa debit cards like credit cards for so long, they were so used to swiping and many did not remember their PINs. So it was so common that it is now standard to offer the ability to process the Visa debit card either way. So that's really, it's more of a convenience thing for U.S. consumers than anything else. So as a business owner, you can recover the credit card processing charge with a convenience fee, or you may accept this as a cost of business to accommodate your customers' payment needs. So it's up to you to really see which works for you, especially if you have customers on either side of the border. It's one of those things where you have to see what works for you and what doesn't work for you. Let me talk to you about consumer drawbacks of Visa debit cards here. So, although there are many reasons that we just went over why it's beneficial to accept credit cards at your business, there are some drawbacks for consumers and merchants to actually taking them, whether you are in the States or you are in Canada. So for consumers, using Visa debit cards means what? Means that purchases won't build or hurt their credit. It means that there may be a limited services or access. There are also monthly fees, activation fees, and ATM fees that will depend on the provider. It means that you have withdrawal and purchasing limits. And when using credit rails, interchange rates, processing fees are higher in Canada. So this is something to really remember here. Now, let me give you a few reasons your business should accept Visa debit this year. Basically, first, you give customers choice and convenience, right? Visa debit gives customers more choice in how they want to pay for items. So by increasing the likelihood that a customer can pay using their preferred method, then you are actually ensuring your business is not going to miss out on any potential sales. So revenue will go up. You have easy payments for travelers. So Visa debit allows customers from countries where debit cards are common to continue using their cards in countries that do not typically use or accept debit cards. So travelers may not travel with large amounts of cash. So by increasing the variety of cards, you are actually, you're making it easier for travelers to shop with you. Now, not everyone has access to a credit card. So some people may be eligible for a credit card because they are under 18, but they actually lack the credit needed to get a card, or they are simply more comfortable with other forms of payment. So by accepting Visa debit, you are making it easier for those without credit cards to actually access the goods and services you are selling and that they are interested in. You also have a consumer protection. So Visa debit comes with Visa's zero liability policy, which really actually gives consumers protection for their purchases that they do not have this through the Interac debit network. Consumers can be confident that if they use their cards, their transactions are protected. So as a recap here, you have to understand that now that you understand what a Visa debit card is, how to use one, the benefits and the differences between the US and Canada, you have to really understand that it's all about convenience. It's all about what works for you. It's all about what your merchant is willing to take, okay? Now, Visa debit cards can be used for retail through a virtual terminal or your online checkout. So if you have a merchant account, then you are automatically able to accept Visa debit. If your business needs to accept credit cards, basically you can have a network providing honest, transparent, and affordable credit card processing that stands out in an industry known for shady business practices and customer exploitation, okay? So that's really important to keep in mind. So here's the bottom line to this conversation. I spoke to you about how Visa debit cards worked in the US versus Canada. I give you the general facts, the purchase process, how Visa debit works, and now the bottom line. Thank you so much. God bless you. I'll see you next time. Until then, remember, stay marvelous.